Section 2 of an essay concerning human understanding, Book 2, by John Locke. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Franklin Vias. Chapter 2 of Simple Ideas. 1. The better to understand the nature, manner, and extent of our knowledge, one thing is carefully to be observed concerning the ideas we have, and that is, that some of them are simple and some complex. Though the qualities that affect our senses are, in the things themselves, so united and blended that there is no separation, no distance between them, yet it is plain the ideas they produce in the mind enter by the senses simple and unmixed. For though the sight and touch often take in from the same object, at the same time, different ideas as a man sees at once motion and color, the hand feels softness and warmth in the same piece of wax, yet the simple ideas, thus united in the same subject, are as perfectly distinct as those that come in by different senses, the coldness and hardness which a man feels in a piece of ice being as distinct ideas in the mind as the smell and whiteness of a lily, or as the taste of sugar and smell of a rose. And there is nothing can be plainer to a man than the clear and distinct perception he has of those simple ideas, which, being each in itself uncompounded, contains in it nothing but one uniform appearance or conception in the mind, and is not distinguishable into different ideas. 2. These simple ideas, the materials of all our knowledge, are suggested and furnished to the mind only by those two ways above mentioned, viz., sensation and reflection. When the understanding is once stored with these simple ideas, it has the power to repeat, compare, and unite them, even to an almost infinite variety, and so can make at pleasure new complex ideas. But it is not in the power of the most exalted wit, or enlarged understanding, by any quickness or variety of thought, to invent or frame one new simple idea in the mind, not taken in by the ways aforementioned, nor can the force of the understanding destroy those that are there. The dominion of man in this little world of his own understanding, being much what the same as it is in the great world of visible things, wherein his power, however managed by art and skill, reaches no further than to compound and divide the materials that are made to his hand, but can do nothing towards the making the least particle of new matter, or destroying one atom of what is already in being. The same ability will everyone find in himself who shall go about to fashion in his understanding any simple idea, not received in by his senses from external objects, or by reflection from the operations of his own mind about them. I would have any one try to fancy any taste which had never affected his palate, or frame the idea of a scent he had never smelt, and when he can do this, I will also conclude that a blind man hath ideas of colors, and a deaf man true distinct notions of sounds. 3. This is the reason why, though we cannot believe it impossible to God to make a creature with other organs, and more ways to convey into the understanding the notice of corporeal things than those 5 as they are usually accounted, which he has given to man, yet I think it is not possible for anyone to imagine other qualities in bodies, howsoever constituted, whereby they can be taken notice of, besides sounds, tastes, smells, visible and tangible qualities. And had mankind been made but with 4 senses, the qualities then, which are the object of the 5th sense, had been as far from our notice, imagination, and conception, and now any belonging to a 6th, 7th, or 8th sense can possibly be, which, whenever yet some other creatures, in some other parts of this vast and stupendous universe, may not have, will be a greater presumption to deny. He that will not set himself proudly at the top of all things, but will consider the immensity of this fabric and the great variety that is to be found in this little and inconsiderable part of it which he has to do with, may be apt to think that in other mansions of it there may be other and different intelligent beings of those faculties he has a little knowledge or apprehension, as a worm shut up in one drawer of a cabinet hath of the senses or understanding of a man. Such variety and excellency being suitable to the wisdom and power of the Maker. I have here followed the common opinion of man's having but 5 senses, though perhaps there may be justly counted more, but either supposition serves equally to my present purpose. Chapter 3. Of Ideas of One Sense. 1. The better to conceive the ideas we receive from sensation, it may not be amiss for us to consider them, in reference to the different ways whereby they make their approaches to their minds, and make themselves perceivable by us. First, then, there are some which come into our minds by one sense only. Secondly, there are others that convey themselves into the mind by more senses than one. Thirdly, others that are had from reflection only. Fourthly, there are some that make themselves way and are suggested to the mind by all the ways of sensation and reflection. We shall consider them apart, under their several heads. First, there are some ideas which have admittance only through one sense, which is peculiarly adapted to receive them, thus light and colors, as white, red, yellow, blue, with their several degrees or shades and mixtures, as green, scarlet, purple, sea green, and the rest, come in only by the eyes, all kinds of noises, sounds, and tones only by the ears, and several tastes and smells by the nose and palate. And if these organs or the nerves, which are the conduits to convey them from without to their audience in the brain, the mind's presence room, as I may so call it, are any of them so disordered as not to perform their functions, they have no postern to be admitted by, no other way to bring themselves into view, and be perceived by the understanding. The most considerable of those belonging to the touch are heat and cold, and solidity, all the rest consisting almost wholly in the sensible configuration as smooth and rough, or else more or less firm adhesion of the parts, as hard and soft, tough and brittle, are obvious enough. 2. I think it will be needless to enumerate all the particular simple ideas belonging to each sense, nor indeed is it possible, if we would, there being a great many more of them belonging to most of the senses than we have names for. The variety of smells, which are as many most, if not more, than species of body in the world, do most of them want names. Sweet and stinking commonly serve our turn for these ideas, which in effect is little more than to call them pleasing or displeasing, though the smell of the rose and violet, both sweet, are certainly very distinct ideas, nor are the different tastes that by our palates we receive ideas of much better provided with names. Sweet, bitter, sour, harsh, and salt are almost all the epithets we have to denominate the numberless variety of relishes which are to be found distinct not only in almost every sort of creatures, but in the different parts of the same plant, fruit, or animal. The same may be said of colors and sounds. I shall therefore, in the count of simple ideas I am here giving, content myself to set down only such as are most material to our present purpose, or are in themselves less apt to be taken notice of, though they are very frequently the ingredients of our complex ideas, amongst which, I think, I may well account solidity, which therefore I shall treat of in the next chapter. Chapter 4. Of Solidity. 1. The idea of solidity we receive by our touch, and it rises from the resistance which we find in body to the entrance of any other body into the place it possesses till it has left it. There is no idea which we receive more constantly from sensation than solidity. Whether we move or rest, in what posture soever we are, we always feel something under us that supports us and hinders our farther sinking downwards, and the bodies which we daily handle make us perceive that whilst they remain between them, they do, by an insurmountable force, hinder the approach of the parts of our hands that press them. That which thus hinders the approach of two bodies, when they are moved one towards another, I call solidity. I will not dispute whether this acception of the word solid be nearer to its original signification than that which mathematicians use it in. It suffices that I think the common notion of solidity will allow, if not justify, this use of it, but if any one think it better to call it impenetrability, he has my consent. Only I have thought the term solidity the more proper to express this idea, not only because it is vulgar to use in that sense, but also because it carries something more of positive in it than impenetrability, which is negative and is perhaps more a consequence of solidity than solidity itself. This, of all other, seems the idea most intimately connected with and essential to body, so as nowhere else to be found or imagined but only in matter. And though our senses take no notice of it, but in masses of matter, of a bulk sufficient to cause a sensation in us, yet the mind, having once got this idea from such grosser sensible bodies, traces it farther, and considers it, as well as figure, in the minutest particle of matter that can exist, and finds it inseparably inherent in body, wherever or however modified. 2. This is the idea which belongs to body, whereby we conceive it to fill space. The idea of which filling of space is that where we imagine any space taken up by a solid substance, we conceive it so to possess it, that it excludes all other solid substances, and will forever hinder any other two bodies that move towards one another in a straight line from coming to touch one another, unless it removes from between them in a line not parallel to that which they move in. This idea of it the bodies which we ordinarily handle sufficiently furnish us with. 3. This resistance, whereby it keeps other bodies out of the space which it possesses, is so great that no force, how great soever, can surmount it. All the bodies in the world, pressing a drop of water on all sides, will never be able to overcome the resistance which it will take, soft as it is, to their approaching one another, till it be removed out of their way, whereby our idea of solidity is distinguished both from pure space, which is capable neither of resistance nor motion, and from the ordinary idea of hardness. For a man may conceive two bodies at a distance, so as they may approach one another, without touching or displacing any solid thing, till their superficies come to meet, whereby I think we have the clear idea of space without solidity. 4. Not to go so far as annihilation of any particular body, I ask, whether a man cannot have the idea of the motion of one single body alone, without any other succeeding immediately to its place? I think it is evident he can. The idea of motion in one body no more including the idea of motion in another than the idea of a square figure in one body includes the idea of a square figure in another. I do not ask whether bodies do so exist that the motion of one body cannot really be without the motion of another. To determine this either way is to beg the question for or against a vacuum. But my question is, whether one cannot have the idea of one body moved whilst others are at rest, and I think this no one will deny. If so, then the place it deserted gives us the idea of pure space without solidity, wherein too any other body may enter without either resistance or protrusion of anything. When the sucker in a pump is drawn, the space it filled in the tube is certainly the same whether any other body follows the motion of the sucker or not, nor does it imply a contraction that, upon the motion of one body, another that is only contiguous to it should not follow it. The necessity of such a motion is built only on the supposition that the world is full, but not on the distinct ideas of space and solidity, which are as different as resistance and not resistance, protrusion and not protrusion, and that men have ideas of space without a body. Their very disputes about a vacuum plainly demonstrate, as is showed in another space. 4. Solidity is hereby also different from hardness, in that solidity consists in repletion, and so an utter exclusion of other bodies out of the space it possesses, but hardness, in a firm of cohesion of the parts of matter, making up masses of a sensible bulk, so that the whole does not easily change its figure. And indeed, hard and soft are names that we give to things only in relation to the constitutions of our own bodies, that being generally called hard by us, which will put us to pain sooner than change figure by the pressure of any part of our bodies, and that, on the contrary, soft, which changes the situation of its parts upon an easy and unpainful touch. But this difficulty of changing the situation of the sensible parts amongst themselves, or of the figure of the whole, gives no more solidity of the hardest body in the world than to the softest, nor is an adamant one jot more solid than water. For though the two flat sides of two pieces of marble will more easily approach each other, between which there is nothing but water or air, than if there be a diamond between them, yet it is not that the parts of the diamond are more solid than those of water, or resist more, but because, the parts of water being more easily separable from each other, they will, by a side motion, be more easily removed, and give way to the approach of the two pieces of marble. But if they could be kept from making place by that side motion, they would eternally hinder the approach of these two pieces of marble as much as the diamond, and it would be as impossible by any force to surmount their resistance as to surmount the resistance of the parts of a diamond. The softest body in the world will as invisibly resist the coming together of any other two bodies, if it be not put out of the way, but remain between them, as the hardest that can be found or imagined. He that shall fill a yielding soft body well with air and water will quickly find its resistance, and he that thinks that nothing but bodies that are hard can keep his hands from approaching one another may be pleased to make a trial with the air enclosed in a football. The experiment, I have been told, was made at Florence with a hollow globe of gold filled with water and exactly closed, which farther shows the solidity of so soft a body as water. For the golden globe thus filled being put into a press, which was driven by the extreme force of screws, the water made itself way through the pores of the very close metal, and finding no room for a nearer approach of its particles within, go to the outside, where it rose like a dew, and so fell in drops, before the sides of the globe could be made to yield to the violent compression of the engine that squeezed it. 5. By this idea of solidity is the extension of body distinguished from the extension of space, the extension of the body being nothing but the cohesion or continuity of solid, separable, movable parts, and the extension of space, the continuity of unsolid, inseparable, and immovable parts. Upon the solidity of bodies also depend their mutual impulse, resistance, and protrusion. Of pure space, then, and solidity, there are several, amongst which I confess myself one, who persuade themselves they have clear and distinct ideas, and that they can think on space without anything in it that resists or is protruded by body. This is the idea of pure space, which they think they have as clear as any idea they can have of the extension of body. The idea of the distance between the opposite parts of a concave superficies being equally as clear without as with the idea of any solid parts between, and on the other side they persuade themselves that they have, distinct from that of pure space, the idea of something that fills space, that can be protruded by the impulse of other bodies, or resist their motion. If there be others that have not these two ideas distinct, but confound them, and make but one of them, I know not how men, who have the same idea under different names, or different ideas under the same name, can, in that case, talk with one another any more than a man, who, not being blind or deaf, has distinct ideas of the colors of scarlet and the sound of a trumpet, could discourse concerning scarlet color with a blind man I mention in another place, who fancied that the idea of scarlet was like the sound of a trumpet. 6. If anyone asks what this solidity is, I send them to his senses to inform him. Let him put a flint or a football between his hands, and then endeavor to join them, and he will know. If he thinks this not a sufficient explication of solidity, what it is, and wherein it consists, I promise to tell him what it is, and wherein it consists. When he tells me what thinking is, or wherein it consists, or explains to me what extension or motion is, which perhaps seems much easier. The simple ideas we have are such as experience teaches them us, but if, beyond that, we endeavor by words to make them clearer in the mind, we shall succeed no better than if we went about to clear up the darkness of the blind man's mind by talking, and to discourse into him the ideas of light and colors. The reason of this I shall show in another place. Chapter 5. Of simple ideas of diverse senses. The ideas we get by more than one sense are of space, or extension, figure, rest, and motion, for these make perceivable impressions, both on the eyes and touch, and we can perceive and convey into our minds the ideas of the extension, figure, motion, and rest of bodies, both by seeing and feeling. But having occasion to speak more at large of these in another place, I here only enumerate them. Chapter 6. Of simple ideas of reflection. 1. The mind, receiving the ideas mentioned in the foregoing chapters from without, when it turns its view inward upon itself, and observes its own actions about those ideas it has, takes from thence other ideas, which are as capable to be the objects of its contemplation as any of those it received from foreign things. 2. The two great and principal actions of the mind, which are most frequently considered, and which are so frequent that every one that pleases may take notice of them in himself, are these two: perception or thinking, and volition or willing. The power of thinking is called the understanding, and the power of volition is called the will, and these two powers or abilities in the mind are denominated faculties. Of some of the modes of these simple ideas of reflection, such as remembrance, discerning, reasoning, judging, knowledge, faith, etc., I shall have occasion to speak hereafter. Chapter 7. Of simple ideas of both sensation and reflection. 1. There be other simple ideas which convey themselves into the mind by all the ways of sensation and reflection, viz. Pleasure or delight, and its opposite, pain and uneasiness, power, existence, unity. 2. Delight or uneasiness, one or other of them, join themselves to almost all our ideas, both of sensation and reflection, and there is scarce any affection of our senses from without, any retired thought of our mind within, which is not able to produce in us pleasure or pain. By pleasure and pain, I would be understood to signify whatsoever delights or molests us most, whether it arises from the thoughts of our minds, or anything operating on our bodies. For whether we call it satisfaction, delight, pleasure, happiness, etc., on the one side, or uneasiness, trouble, pain, torment, anguish, misery, etc., on the other, they are still but different degrees of the same thing, and belong to the ideas of pleasure and pain, delight or uneasiness, which are the names I shall most commonly use for those two sorts of ideas. 3. The infinitely wise author of our own being have given us the power over several parts of our bodies, to move or to keep them at rest as we think fit, and also by the motion of them, to move ourselves and other contagious bodies, in which consist all the actions of our body, having also given a power to our minds in several instances, to choose amongst its ideas which it will think on, and to pursue the inquiry of this or that subject with consideration and attention, to excite us to these actions of thinking and motion that we are capable of, has been pleased to join to several thoughts and several sensations a perception of delight. If this were wholly separated from all our outward sensations and inward thoughts, we should have no reason to prefer one thought or action to another, negligence to attention, or motion to rest, and so we should neither steer our bodies nor employ our minds, but let our thoughts, if I may so call it, run adrift without any direction or design, and suffer the ideas of our minds, like unregarded shadows, to make their appearances there as it happened, without attending to them. In which state man, however furnished with the faculties of understanding and will, would be a very idle and active creature, and passed his time only in a lazy, lethargic dream. It has therefore pleased our wise Creator to annex to several objects and ideas which we receive from them, as also to several of our thoughts, a concomitant pleasure, and that in several objects, to several degrees, that those faculties which He had endowed us with might not remain wholly idle and unemployed by us. 4. Pain has the same efficacy and use to set us on work that pleasure has, we being as ready to employ our faculties to avoid that as to pursue this. Only this is worth our consideration, that pain is often produced by the same objects and ideas that produce pleasure in us. This their near conjunction, which makes us often feel pain in the sensations where we expected pleasure, gives us new occasion of admiring the wisdom and goodness of our Maker, who, designing the preservation of our being, has annexed pain to the application of many things to our bodies, to warn us of the harm that they will do, and as advises to withdraw from them. But He not designing our preservation barely, but the preservation of every part and organ of its perfection, hath, in many cases, annexed pain to those very ideas which delight us. Thus heat, that is very agreeable to us in one degree, by a little greater increase of it, proves no to ordinary torment, and the most pleasant of all sensible objects, light itself, if there be too much of it, if increased beyond a due proportion of our eyes, causes a very painful sensation, which is wisely and favorably so ordered by nature, that when any object does by the vehemency of its operation disorder the instruments of sensation, those structures cannot but be very nice and delicate, we might by the pain be warned to withdraw from the organ to quite put out of order, and so be unfitted for its proper function for the future. The consideration of those objects that produce it may well persuade us that this is the end or use of pain. For though great light be insufferable to our eyes, yet the highest degree of darkness does not at all disease them, because that causing no disorderly motion in it, leaves that curious organ unarmed in its natural state. But yet excessive cold, as well as heat, pains us, because it is equally destructive to that temper which is necessary to the preservation of life, and the exercise of the several functions of the body, and which consists in a moderate degree of warmth, or, if you please, a motion of the insensible parts of our body, confined within certain bounds. 5. Beyond all this we may find another reason, why God hath scattered up and down several degrees of pleasure and pain in all the things that environ and affect us, and blended them together in almost all that our thoughts and senses have to do with, that we, finding imperfection, dissatisfaction, and want of complete happiness in all the enjoyments which the creatures can afford us, might be led to seek it in the enjoyment of him with whom there is fullness of joy, and at whose right hand are pleasures for evermore. 6. Though what I have here said may not perhaps make the ideas of pleasure and pain clearer to us than our own experience does, which is the only way that we are capable of having them, yet the consideration of the reason why we are annexed to so many other ideas, serving to give us due sentiments of the wisdom and goodness of the sovereign disposer of all things, may not be unsuitable to the main end of these inquiries, the knowledge and veneration of him being the chief end of all our thoughts, and the proper business of all understandings. 7. Existence and unity are two other ideas that are suggested to the understanding by every object without and every idea within. When ideas are in our minds, we consider them being actually there, as well as we consider things to be actually without us, which is, that they exist or have existence, and whatever we can consider as one thing, whether a real being or idea, suggests to the understanding the idea of unity. 8. Power is also another of those simple ideas which we receive from sensation and reflection. For observing in ourselves that we can at pleasure move several parts of our bodies which were at rest, the effects also that natural bodies are able to produce in one another, occurring every moment to our senses, we both these ways get the idea of power. 9. Besides these, there is another idea which, though suggested by our senses, yet is more constantly offered to us by what passes in our minds, and that is the idea of succession. For if we look immediately into ourselves and reflect on what is observable there, we shall find our ideas always, whilst we are awake or have any thought, passing in train, one going and another coming, without intermission. 10. These, if they are not all, are at least, as I think, the most considerable of all those simple ideas which the mind has, and out of which is made all its other knowledge, all which it receives only by the two forementioned ways of sensation and reflection. Nor let anyone think these too narrow bounds for the capacious mind of a man to expatiate in, which takes its flight farther than the stars, and cannot be confined by the limits of the world, and extends its thoughts often even beyond the utmost expansion of matter, and makes excursions into the incomprehensible inane. I grant all this, but desire any one to assign any simple idea which is not received from one of those inlets before mentioned, or any complex idea not made out of those simple ones, nor will it be so strange to think these few simple ideas sufficient to employ the quickest thought or largest capacity, or to furnish the materials of all the various knowledge and more various fancies and opinions of all mankind, if we consider how many words may be made out of the various composition of 24 letters, or if, going one step further, we will but reflect on the variety of combinations may be made with barely one of the above-mentioned ideas, viz. Numbers, whose stock is inexhaustible and truly infinite, and what a large and immense field doth extension alone afford mathematicians. End of section 2. Recording by Franklin Vias.